from KBIA and the Reynolds Journalism Institute. On air and online, this is Intersection.
Hello and welcome to Intersection, where people and ideas meet online and on KBIA. I'm Ryan Famuliner. Columbia's downtown may soon become the home to yet another luxury housing development. A New York developer is considering plans to build a 24-story complex on the corner of 6th and Elm. The development echoes a trend being seen in many public university towns across the nation to create luxury housing for an affluent student population. But is this trend sustainable? Today on Intersection, we'll take a closer look at student housing in Columbia. In the first half of the show, we'll discuss how it's changing the college experience for students. And in the second half of the program, we'll talk about how it's changing Columbia. Joining me in studio to talk about these issues and others, Kristofor Husted is a reporter at KBIA. He's been following this story closely and earlier this year filed a report for American Public Media's Marketplace. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Frankie Miner is the Director of Residential Life at MU and has been since the mid-1990s. Frankie, thanks for joining us.
Happy to be here.
And joining us by Skype today, Elizabeth Armstrong is an Associate Professor of Sociology and Organizational Studies at the University of Michigan. She's the co-author of the book Paying for the Party, How College Maintains Inequality. Elizabeth, thanks for calling in.
Delighted to be here.
All right. We'd also love to hear from you and our audience. What do you think of the student housing developments popping up in Columbia? Share your thoughts. Give us a call at 573-882-8925 or email intersection@kbia.org. You could also tweet us at intersectkbia. Okay, so to start off, maybe we'll start with Chris, actually, since you're here, and we've already talked right before the show, so that makes it easier to start with you. So tell us a little about the report that you put out for Marketplace, talking about the effect these student housing complexes are having on the college experience at universities like MU.
Sure. So basically, across the country, we've been seeing a lot of different luxury student housing complexes popping up. This is in public university communities and on their campuses. So the issue, and I guess I should also say what these complexes entail, which they come with rooftop pools and bars, in-house movie complexes, gaming centers, all sorts of fancy things that you don't normally associate with student housing. The problem with this is it's implicitly segregating students based on income. So the only students who can afford this top-end living environment are the wealthier. The lower income students can't do that. And in turn, that creates a social divide in the university culture and after university culture, or after the university experience as well.
Right. And Elizabeth, might be a good time to bring you in, because that's a little bit of what you focused on in the book that we mentioned earlier, that type of class divide that Chris is mentioning there.
Yeah, so that these new kinds of complexes certainly exacerbate a class divide, but it's not new in the sense that on these kinds of universities, these big public universities, that many of them have pretty elaborate fraternity and sorority systems, Greek systems, and generally, these fraternities and sororities are selecting on the basis of social class, and so students are already on campus living in kind of class-segregated types of situations. But when they move off campus into these kinds of situations, then they're moving into situations which are just as divided by class, but where, and they may be partying just as hard, where there's potentially even less oversight by the university.
Sure. Yeah, and so, I mean, this may be an obvious question, but why, Chris, you presented it as a problem. Why is this a problem for these students, other than the situation they're put in for that year? Why does that matter beyond this point of being in college, I guess?
Right. So essentially you have rich kids living with rich kids and poor kids living with poor kids, and that divide ultimately affects how they are, if they're successful later on down the road. So by the rich kids hanging out with the rich kids, and living with people who are of their affluence, they're only socially connecting and networking with these people who may already have some influence with their families or because they're wealthier down the road. This will give them better chances at jobs later on and a different experience socially on campus or off campus, whereas the lower income students, they don't get that opportunity to network and meet people that may be able to help them later on. And if they do try to compete and keep up and do live with the wealthier kids, sometimes they end up in deeper debt burning through student loans to keep up with that lifestyle that they think they should be living in.
Elizabeth? Yeah.
Yeah, oh, we found that absolutely. Well, there's all kinds of consequences. I mean, even consequences in school, like who knows which classes to take when, who has the better information about how to get through school. When the less affluent kids are cut out of these networks, they are cut out of just kind of networks that can just help like navigate the university as well. And I mean, another part of it is that they're actually cut out of romantic and dating networks as well. There's a lot of class segregation in terms of who ends up kind of getting romantically involved. If people just have entirely class segregated worlds, that's going to affect everything in, out, and through college. And it's a really different vision of campus life than most of us have. I mean, most of us have this idea that people are going to go and meet people different than themselves and have all kinds of exposure across differences of all sorts. And when social worlds are entirely class divided, that's just not going to happen.
Right. And Frankie, it might be good to bring you in here too. I guess this class segregation we're talking about, from the perspective of residential life, what can be done to try to address that possible problem, I guess, and what are some of the strategies you guys use here?
Well, we've got the very same concern, and I think Chris raises an excellent point, Elizabeth, in her book, in the sense that what we're doing is preparing citizens for the next generation of leaders. I mean, yes, I'm in the housing business, but that's not the ends of my job here is to help educate students, and part of that is that social education. And if they're only interacting with people who are like themselves, whether it's ethnic diversity, whether it's cultural, sexual orientation, or socioeconomic diversity, if they're limiting they're limiting their perspective of the world and how they're going to shape that. I think if these people are going to become the managers of large businesses and stuff like that, to what extent are they going to be able to empathize with their lowest paid employees, their blue-collar workers who may be producing their wealth? But if they can't understand their lifestyle and perspective because they've always lived within privilege or lived in a situation where they don't know what it's like to go hungry or to not have some of the privileges that these housing accommodations. I don't want to lay it all on the housing, but I think it's symptomatic of a larger issue.
Right. Well, what are some of the things that are offered in the dorms here on campus for someone who's living on there that they may be missing out on? That's not, the sanctioned opportunities here that, in these private settings with these housing structures that are out of control of the university that they may not be getting there.
Well, the two biggest differences, I think, is our job is the educational mission. We are here to help educate students. Students spend about 70% of their time outside of class. A lot of that is spent in where they're living. So what can we do to capitalize on it? We do a wide variety of educational programs that talk with them with issues about diversity, that talk with them about issues of difference and privilege and so on. Those kind of conversations are by and large not happening in these private. The other issue is my job is only to break even. As an auxiliary operation at the institution, I generate all my own revenue to pay for all of that. Anything I have left in the end gets reinvested back into the programs or into the facilities. I don't need to generate a profit, whereas these private businesses, ultimately they're meeting a need, but they're also there to generate additional wealth for whoever owns them.
Mm-hmm. So what are some of the ways you talked about getting people to socialize in these diverse groups? What are some of the ways you can incentivize that, I guess, and make that happen? I mean, I guess, again, you're not choosing your roommate, something like that, but what are the other ways, I guess?
Well, one of the things that we're most nationally recognized for is our freshman interest group, or FIGS program. We allow students to segregate or congregate together by common interests. That can be a wide variety of socioeconomic backgrounds, ethnic diversity, whatever, but what they have in common is their academic or social interest, whether it's on leadership issues, whether it's trying to become the next journalist and the next nurse and so on. So what we find is those common academic interests cut across all of those other boundaries. They cut across socioeconomic status. They cut across a variety of different things. And we allow students to not only live together, but take some common courses together. And in the seminar course that's taught by other students and a faculty member, the issue of diversity and ethics are two of the topics that they specifically talk about in the context of that. So in essence, what we're saying is we're enriching the educational experience. It's not just about housing. Yes, I house students, but primarily my job is to help create a learning experience for them that supports and enhances what they're doing in the classroom.
Okay. Elizabeth, go ahead.
Oh, I jump in there. Yeah, I think that the learning communities are really important. and is a way to kind of get interesting diversity and kind of integration going. The residence hall floor that Laura Hamilton and I observed was a floor that didn't have such a kind of any freshman interest group or learning community aspect of it. And it was basically just a holding place before people rushed and joined the Greek system. And it was very, very difficult for the residential advisor there to do anything towards building community because they were already oriented to joining their fraternities or their sororities, and so they had their eye ahead to already their class segregated community that they were going to join. So it's tricky to figure out. It's challenging for the residential life to figure out how to create these kind of learning communities. It's a challenging process to do it.
I want to take a moment to remind our listeners that this is Intersection, a program of KBIA and the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Ryan Famuliner, and today we're talking about student housing developments in Columbia and how it's changing the college experience for students. Joining me in studio are Kristofor Husted, a reporter at KBIA who's been covering the developments downtown and their impact on students and the community. Frankie Miner, who's the director of residential life at MU and has been since the mid-1990s. And joining us by Skype today, Elizabeth Armstrong is the co-author of the book Paying for the Party, How College Maintains Inequality. And for you in our audience, did you live in a dorm during college? What was it like? Share your thoughts. Give us a call at 573-882-8925 or email intersection@kbia.org. You could also tweet us at intersectkbia. We'd like to remind you that you can watch Intersection as streaming video online during our live conversations every Monday afternoon at 2 at kbia.org. You can watch that video and join our online chat by going to kbia.org and scrolling down to the link for Intersection. Again, that's Mondays at 2 online at kbia.org. So one thing, we had a producer for the show, Andrew Yost, go out and actually went to some of these housing developments here in Columbia. Actually went to Brookside, which is a well-known series of developments downtown. And he talked to some of the residents that live there. And we wanted to share some of the comments that they made here. The questions he was asking on this line of comments here that you'll hear was asking students to compare their past living experiences, many of them in the dorms, with their experiences now living at Brookside downtown.
In my mind, it's just really not a comparison. I didn't have the best dorm experience, but that was due to just kind of random chance. Like, I was put with a roommate who we didn't really have much of anything in common. But if all the prices were similar, I definitely like the apartment better because it's literally your own home. Like, you can do anything you want. You're not restricted on really much of anything. They were saying that there's actually enough demand for units downtown which probably, leads to why they built the new buildings, but there's enough demand for units downtown that they actually could fill the sublet spot for me.
The location is definitely the best thing about living downtown, but I also thought about living in my sorority house, which also would have had a meal plan and whatnot. So definitely comparing living on campus with a meal plan, it's easier to have the food right there already prepared for you and you just go there and get it than living off campus.
My sophomore year, I lived in a fraternity on campus. I liked that a lot because of the location and the meal service. Disadvantages to it, it was really loud, it was hard to sleep at night, things like that. Last year, I lived on West Campus. It was nice having my own house, but the house is really run down. It's like a shack and it was falling apart. But we could do whatever we wanted and no problem with the neighbors or noise or anything like that.
So the people we heard from there were Matt Barham, Demi Yeager, and Dave Tressler. So I guess just wanted to see your guys' reactions to those thoughts. We heard their comments about location being a big consideration, which is something I guess Frankie, you're obviously competing with at this point as residential life. What initial reactions do you have to some of those thoughts on this change for them?
Well, I think it's interesting they talk about the quality of their experience there. When we talk with students who move off campus, one often the thing they dislike the most is feeling disconnected from campus. But I think that's before we started seeing the development of these closer in, more proximate apartment complexes. When you were 2-3 miles away, having to drive in, students would go back to their apartment complexes and feel disconnected with the social experience. And if you haven't been on campus after 5, it's a pretty hopping place, and there's a lot of things that are going on there. So students felt disconnected from that. But the one young man talked about one of the reasons students do want to move off campus. they want that freedom. They want the freedom to do what they want. They're not so happy about some of the policies that we enforce and so on, to try to create that more quieter environment that the other student also wasn't able to experience. So I think their reasons for moving off campus are very understandable. They want to be independent. I think what the concern is are they ready for that independence and that quality of experience? The other student, the young woman, talked about the fact that she really, liked having her meals readily available, not having to spend the time to do that. I think students realize they're eventually going to mature to where they're going to have to take on more and more responsibility for doing that. The question I've got is, are they like the freedom that comes with off-campus living? Are they willing to take on the responsibility that comes with that as well? And particularly when it has such high rent payments or for all those additional amenities.
Right. And Elizabeth, too, in the title of your book, talk about the party culture of universities. I guess, is that maybe one of the motivations there that you would see for that?
Well, yeah, I mean, some of these complexes in some towns, they turn into party central. And so in some ways, because only a certain set of students can afford to live in these places, they end up actually having a lot in common. The one young man talked about not having a lot in common with his roommate. Well, by the time all of the sorts of students who can afford these places move into these complexes, they do have a lot in common. So they party a lot, and sometimes in terms of the freedom that the other student mentioned, sometimes the stuff can get a little out of control. And it's not clear that the managers of these for-profit apartment complexes have the same either interest or expertise in kind of helping young people navigate safely through the dangers of kind of young adult life. And that's not to say that bad stuff doesn't happen in residence halls. I mean, it definitely does, but there are certain risks that students are taking on by kind of moving off campus in this way.
Sure. And I guess, too, I mean, maybe it's a good time to transition to talk about these amenities as well that are offered, because I think we heard that somewhere, that's a motivation as well, that you've got, a pool there and all that kind of stuff. A lot of these have those. What kind of students is that attracting as well, I guess, is the question. Those high-end amenities that, many seem much fly in the face of what many people think a college experience usually is. Elizabeth, maybe you can help me with that, what those amenities.
For the party, we identified a type of student who was very much interested in the college experience as a social experience. And so these groups, we call them socialites and wannabes. These were students who were majoring in often very easy majors, things like sports marketing or tourism, who were going out for 3, 4, 5 nights a week, who were not doing much homework and who saw the social aspect of it, and the drinking and the hooking up and the kind of actually this sort of luxury aspect of it as pretty central to it. And one of the commentators referred before to students who were sort of trying to keep up with the kind of fast-paced life who couldn't in fact do so. And that was our wannabe group. And these were students who tried to have a very kind of elite, kind of fast-paced social life in college, who then found upon graduation that their degrees were useless in terms of the job market, that the 2.7 GPA in communications didn't actually translate into a job requiring a college degree, and they landed back in their parents' basements. Unlike their more affluent peers, their parents didn't set them up in apartments in Manhattan or call their CEO friends to get them jobs. So one of these young women reported, nobody told me Disneyland was going to end. So she enjoyed her college experience a lot, but by the time it was done, she realized that it might have been worth it to spend the time investing a little bit more in the educational part of the experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, and obviously a lot of this is out of the university's control because it's happening in the private sector. But what incentives are there, though? You talked about this in your book, for universities to take on these socialites, I guess, as you call them.
Oh, well, they are very, very appealing students for cash-strapped public universities these days. I mean, so partly what's driving this production of luxury housing in towns, Midwest college towns all over, or college towns all over the country, is that these schools are competing for affluent, often out of state students. It's a different constituency. It's a different population that that's in kind of Iowa City and Wilmington and Columbia and similar kinds of towns. These are kids whose parents can pay full tuition. They're paying more tuition than in-state students because the universities can charge it, and these students are really helping these universities like meet their expenses, and so actually they it's kind of interesting that if the students are moving off campus, it's bringing revenue into the town in general, but maybe not revenue quite as directly on campus anymore.
Yeah, well, and Frankie, that's maybe a question to ask. I mean, not necessarily specifically about that, but obviously these new housing developments downtown are your competition as residential life, right? So is there any, what are the motivations or what has to happen to try to continue to compete, I guess, when some of these things get so frivolous and
well, actually, we've had a fairly good relationship with the private vendors because we're not competing for students right now. The growth of the institution here at Mizzou has meant that we've just had to shift our population from being about 2/3 freshmen out to about 85% freshmen. We have a requirement that requires freshmen to live on campus, and there's decades of research that goes back at this institution that showed that students who live on campus even 1 year, they're more likely to graduate, they do better academically than their commuting counterparts. So right now what we've been doing is actually had to limit the number of students who want to come back for a second or a third year in order to have that the situation. That affects the experience though, because we feel that having older students living in and amongst these freshmen is a good thing. Some institutions have a strategy where they segregate their freshmen by halls. We don't do that. We think the mixing, again, that diversity of experience is part of the learning experience. So they're not really our competition yet. Now, if all of a sudden our enrollment were to decline dramatically and I can't fill my halls, then that becomes a very different situation. But one of the nice things is it's been a pretty easy sell. I think most families understand that living on campus at least your first year is good for a variety of reasons. Even if they don't read any of the research, it just seems like the things to do. And particularly when we've added these learning communities and also been able to upgrade our facilities, students realize that their living experience on campus is more connected to their academic experience. So it has more relevance. It's not just about getting out. The one thing I would like to comment on this is I think to some extent, as a parent of three college graduates, 2 of them here from MU, I think parents have a tremendous role in playing this, and I don't think it's often talked about. Chris and I talked about this, is that parents, I think, are not wanting to have their students go through maybe the experience they had, which was delayed gratification. When you went away to college, at least when dinosaurs ruled the earth and I went to school, where you lived, there was almost a pride point of how cheaply you got through college, how cheap your accommodations, your cinder block and plank bookcases, the old ratty couch that you had. So you put yourself through for delayed gratification for a better quality of life and standard of living that you earn later. I'm afraid these parents are not willing to have their students go through that kind of delayed gratification or denial of the nicest things right now, but want them to have it from the very beginning because they've had it in their homes. And I'm particularly concerned about the students whose earning potential is not going to allow them to pay back those college loans that they're taking out to pay for this higher end housing. And then when they actually get out and get a real job in the real world, they're living in much less nicer facilities than they lived in as a college student.
Yeah. Kind of jumping in there, Laura Hamilton, my co-author, she interviewed the parents of the young women that we studied in the residence hall, and she found, and she'll be writing a book on this, she found that actually some of the parents very much believed that they were buying an experience for their kids. In fact, that they were willing to fund and even overfund in order to make sure that the kind of standard of living was quite high and had more interest in sort of the quality of the social experience for their kids than they did really the academic experience. And so there's a lot of diversity among parents on this, what they think that they're paying and what if they want to pay for a party or if they really see this as an academic experience. But I think that the notion that the parents are key actors in this is absolutely key.
Right.
Yeah.
And Chris, we haven't heard from you in a bit, but one thing I wanted to get to you on as well that we were talking about a little bit with Frankie too is the fact that maybe they're not competition, but still students are thinking about the prices, right? And trying to compare what's going to make most sense for them financially. In your reporting, I know you've come across students talking about that as well. So what is the situation, I guess, for students when they're talking about this pricing and how it's going to affect them later, what they can afford now?
Right. Well, most of the students I interviewed who are living in these complexes are getting the bill footed by their parents. So and these are the students, as we talked about a little bit earlier, but these are the students are primarily already involved in Greek life or athletics or activities that already have a higher price to participate in. Later on down the road, not too many of them were thinking about down the road. They were just happy to be close to campus and close to the bars downtown and have these amenities. As far as the students who are trying to keep up with that price point, that they definitely probably shouldn't be doing that. Their concern later on down the road is they're going to be in debt coming out and not have a great job to show for it.
Sure. And Frankie, one other thing to come back to on you as well is you were talking about the fact that the ratios coming up with freshmen that have to live on campus because of the housing stock that's available. What's the conversation right now around the potential of building new dorms on campus?
Well, we just started construction on a new residence hall that was not part of our master planning process. We started a master planning process to renovate all of our facilities back in 2001. We thought we'd built our last new ones in 2009, but we're bringing a new one online for the fall of 2015. And our plans are for the facilities directly across from the stadium to actually bring those down and add more beds there, adding about 300 more beds. So we're trying to add capacity where we can, just to be able to make sure mainly that we can house still the freshman class and as many of those returning students coming back. The fact that the private market's responding to that as well. But the other conversation that often occurs, and each time these developers approach me, is they all seem to be going towards the same market segment. Undergraduates, particularly from those from higher socioeconomic means. What I try to tell them all the time is no one is building housing, affordable housing at a much slower price point, maybe not as convenient, not as nice amenities, but still that appeals to a broader segment, or for graduate students or for students with families. No one is building that kind of housing that's out there right now. They're all trying to compete for the same group of students because I think they can get a higher return on their investment much quicker.
Frankie is right. That there isn't that much affordable housing being created out there, and I think that could be partially put on the curators of the university system here. They have more of an influence in what's put up in their surrounding community than maybe Frankie would be able to, or anyone else at the university. But that up at that level, the curators, the board there, that they have some influence and say.
Right. Elizabeth, we only have about 20 seconds left before we have to go to a break, but I wanted to give you the last thought here on I heard you wanting to react to what Frankie was saying there.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I think that certainly in Ann Arbor, at least, the same thing is going on here with the building of luxury undergraduate accommodations right downtown. And a lot of, I think, young professionals and graduate students would love to see housing kind of closer in that was designed more for their needs built, and I don't think that's where the energy is going.
Okay. Well, we don't have to take a quick break. This is Intersection, a program of KBIA and the Reynolds Journalism Institute. Today we've been talking about student housing developments in Columbia and how it's changing the college experience for students. After the break, we'll be shifting the focus of the conversation to the impact these developments are having on the city of Columbia. We'll be bringing in some new guests for the next half hour, but first, thanks to Elizabeth Armstrong for joining us by Skype. We'll be saying goodbye to her. She's the co-author of the book, Paying for the Party, How College Maintains Inequality. Our other guests, KBIA reporter Kristofor Husted and Frankie Miner, will be with us this next half hour as well. I'm Ryan Famulner. We'll be right back after a short break.